welcome to Retech, and today we're going to cover the Commodore 64, and it's the 40th anniversary of the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64, which most people know because it was one of the most ubiquitous machines out there at the time. It was one of the best-selling micros of all time. It's only been surpassed by the Raspberry Pi in the kind of early 21st century, so it had a really good run. It was a 20th century machine, and it lasted for a very long time. And in fact, it's very popular today, especially in the demo scene, and also writing new games for this machine. People are still writing games to be sold and marketed for this machine, and not just people who want to make money. They're actually private individuals who just release games because they can, which is fantastic for a platform which is 40 years old. Now, before we go into the kind of brief timeline of this machine, it's kind of a very personal slant on this video, because the Commodore 64 really didn't come into my radar until after I actually heard one. And now it sounds a bit odd, but you got to think that most people started off in the UK with ZX80, ZX81, Sinclair's ZX Spectrums, and the sound on the ZX Spectrum was pretty woeful, really. It was a single beeper speaker, and it wasn't, you know, what you would call tuneful. It made kind of explosion and zap noises and kind of all that kind of, you know, stuff for games, but it wasn't exactly a full-on music synthesizer. And the prior machines to the Spectrum, such as the ZX81 and ZX80, had no sound at all. And most people in the UK had kind of gravitated towards these machines, mainly because of cost, mainly because of marketing, because one thing that Clive Sinclair was very good at was marketing his machines. And there's a bit of a fable about Jack Tramiel and the fact that he never marketed his machines. He didn't believe in marketing, according to Bill Hurd. Now, this probably wasn't true, because if we have a quick look here, and these are snippets from all over the world.
I adore my 64, my Commodore 64. I cook with it, steam with it, educate the team with it, my Commodore 64. I pitch with it, catch with it, count my chips before the hatch with it, my Commodore 64.
64K memory, at a price that will put a computer in every home, business, and school years before anyone ever dreamed.
I adore my 64, my Commodore 64.
The Commodore 64 home computer has an unusually large memory. Remember, it also has all the peripherals you're ever likely to need. Monitors, plotters, printers, disk drives, and a vast range of software, which means you'll get so much more enjoyment out of your home computer. The Commodore 64. Remember the enormous memory, but don't forget the peripherals and software.
Commodore 64 Family Pack, $499, keeping you ahead in the game of life.
I'm more alive than ever before. I've been to my Commodore 64. My friends are knocking down my door to get into my Commodore 64.
It's mind-boggling. Commodore 64 lets you play hundreds more games than any video machine, plus draw, program, even do music.
I'm more alive than ever before, and my friends are knocking down my door. 'Cause now we're into so much more. We're into our Commodore 64.
The Commodore 64 Family Pack is the best way I know to introduce your family to the world of the future. The Commodore 64 is the world's largest selling computer, with more than 7 million units purchased worldwide, and the world's largest software base for education and entertainment. With this superb Australian reference book included, all for $399 at Commodore dealers now.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore's keeping up with you.
Now, as you can see, the marketing side for the Commodore 64 was intense. and it was going up against the Sinclair ZX range in the UK, and it had a lot of other competition, especially UK wide. You had the Auric, the Dragon, and so on. And also, if you could kind of afford the original Commodore 64 price, you could have bought a BBC Micro. Now you see, the BBC Micro was a more professional machine. It was more of a machine that was aimed towards education and serious use. And in the UK, it got that foothold. And a lot of people whose parents could afford it went out and got a BBC Micro because they were being used in the school. But the BBC Micro was quite an expensive machine. And both the Commodore and the BBC were priced in the same range initially. So really, when you think about it, the ZX Spectrum had a huge run on the Commodore 64 in terms of availability and also price. And also it was a locally kind of produced machine, or produced and designed machine. It was actually built all over the world after a time, but initially it was designed and built in the UK. So there was a little bit of flag waving really to be done, especially, in the kind of playgrounds of the time. So as I said, the Commodore 64 really didn't come into my orbit initially, A, because of its price, B, because of its relative scarcity in the UK, and also originally it didn't have a lot of backing from software houses when it first came out. It took time to build, and I think that's one of the Commodore's strengths, that it actually took time to build the impressive software library, where I think for the ZX Spectrum it wasn't so much time, it was sheer volume. And because people jumped on the bandwagon very early, there was a huge amount of software out there almost from day one for the ZX Spectrum. But if you can hear in the background, you can hear Monty on the Run playing, and it was one of the all-time best, in my opinion, pieces of music that the Commodore 64 ever played. And this is it. And this is the tune that really got me kind of hooked. And as you can tell, it's a fantastic piece of music. It's a fantastic composition. I mean, there were a lot of other Commodore 64 kind of games out there with really good music and good sound. It was the quality of the Commodore 64 sound that actually got me hooked onto this machine. This then became the aspirational machine. This is the machine that I kind of wanted, mainly because of the sound and the quality of its SID chip. I know the SID chip wasn't fantastic. It had issues. It had problems with popping and clipping on the original one, but that added to the kind of natural, kind of almost grungy style sound that you could get out of a Commodore 64. And when you compare it even to the Atari range of machines at the time, such as all of the 8-bit Atari Micros, the 400, the 800, the XL, the XE range, they were great. Their sound was amazing, because I actually had an Atari 400 at one point, and I thought, well, the sound was really good on that. Not a lot could beat that machine. But the Commodore came along and kind of blew everything out of the water. It wasn't graphically the most amazing machine. It wasn't the most powerful machine. And especially, when you consider that the PAL versions really did drop slightly on their processing speed. But the PAL machines also had an advantage of being able to use that gap in between the processing and the video to produce some fantastic effects and some fantastic sound effects that the NTSC machines couldn't do. But that was a trade-off more than an actual design implementation. But with all of its shortcomings, the Commodore 64 was a massively rounded machine. And in the UK and Europe, it became the machine for sound and graphics. And also in Australia it was a huge hit. The Commodore 64 was advertised heavily in Australia as well as other parts of Europe. It wasn't advertised quite so heavily from what I could tell in North America, but then it had a kind of a bigger foothold within the stores it was able to be purchased at. So I don't know if the advertising would have made a massive amount of difference, but you know, the fact that apparently Jack Tramiel didn't believe in marketing, well, he certainly got a lot of it out there for this machine, and deservedly so, because the Commodore 64 really deserves its place in history. Now, most of us know the specifications of this machine, and most of us know the 6502 variant that it used, and the amazing SID chip that actually the machine was really well known for, and the fact that it came with a full-size keyboard, a kind of decent case at the time, when you, especially when you compare it to a lot of other machines, and it was a huge commercial success. Now, if you want to see a little bit more on the Commodore 64 as in technical specifications, well, we did a 3-minute retro version for the Commodore 64 and all of its siblings and variants. So if you want to kind of just see the basic specifications, just hop onto that video. It's only 3 minutes long and it'll give you a lot more on the basic specs of this machine. But this is a celebration of a machine that's now 40 years old. I held back a little bit in doing this video simply because it was very difficult not to do a personal point of view on this machine, and as much as I wanted to kind of avoid that, that's exactly the route I've decided to take, because these machines were personal, and the Commodore 64 was a personal computer, and it was one that's given a lot of happiness to a lot of people. And recently, with the release of the retro games Commodore 64 in the last couple of years, it's found an even bigger foothold in the market. It's actually enticed people from this generation. You know, you're talking children of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and so on, picking up a Commodore 64 from a local supermarket or game store and plugging it in and witnessing and experiencing the games of the past. And just like Marcus, he's got one of these, he's had one for a couple of years, or the Retro 64 version, and it's completely stuffed full of retro games now, and it's one of his favourite machines and he uses it all the time. But not just for gaming, because he wanted to learn how to program, especially in BASIC, so he's been doing a lot of that on it. And because of this, the Commodore 64 is now more widely known throughout this generation of people than any other micro. They did a VIC-20 release, which was just a kind of Commodore 64 with a case color variant. It didn't sell so well, it wasn't as popular, because everybody knows the Commodore 64, and that's the whole thing. Everybody knows the Commodore 64. So thanks for watching this more personal video on the Commodore 64 and its 40th anniversary. It's a machine that changed a lot of people's opinions about computers. It's a machine that got into a lot of homes and kick-started a revolution, and it also kick-started a lot of people's careers in computing and computers. There are two big machines that really did change the course of history, and that's the Commodore 64 and the Sinclair ZX Spectrum in Europe and the UK. The ZX Spectrum and the 64 probably got more people into computing and a career in programming, coding, etc. than any other machine on the market. So you can push computing and the educational side of it as much as you like. If you haven't sparked the interest, then people will not sign up to learn about it. And the likes of the Spectrum and the Commodore 64 with its amazing sound are the machines that actually pushed people down that path. So Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you subscribe, and I'd like to see you again on this channel. So thanks a lot, and see you soon. Bye bye.